The Arizona Territory, 1885. Dust swirled across the trading post where Thomas Red Hawk stood, defeated yet defiant. Once respected among his people, now he owned nothing but the clothes on his back and a worn medicine pouch. The white settlers' laughter cut through the air as Thomas claimed his unlikely prize. A massive, scarred bull with one clouded eye that everyone called worthless. What use was a broken animal to a broken man? Then she appeared, wrapped in a faded blanket, her face partially hidden. "He only listens to me," she whispered, her voice unused to speaking. The crowd fell silent. Who was this mysterious woman who commanded the beast no one could tame? Could these three wounded souls find healing in a land that had shown them nothing but cruelty? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas Red Hawk clutched the medicine pouch at his waist as he led the reluctant bull away from the trading post. The weight of the carved wooden flute hidden inside his shirt pressed against his chest, a reminder of better days when music filled his evenings. He hadn't played a note in 3 winters. The bull snorted, digging its hooves into the dirt. Thomas tugged the rope again, feeling the familiar sting of frustration. Behind him, the woman followed silently, her presence like a shadow. "He won't follow you," she said softly. "Not until he trusts you." Thomas wanted to snap back, but the words died in his throat. Once, he had been a man others listened to, a respected healer among the Chiricahua Apache. Now, he couldn't even command a half-blind bull. "What's your name?" he asked instead. "Nara," she answered, keeping her distance. The faded blanket concealed most of her face, showing only her eyes, dark and wary, like those of a hunted deer. Thomas released the rope. "Then you lead him." The animal immediately responded to Nara's gentle touch on his flank. Thomas watched, remembering when his own touch had healed the sick and wounded. Before the soldiers came. Before the smoke of burning wickiups filled the canyon. Before he buried his wife and son with trembling hands. The memories washed over him like bitter medicine. 5 years ago, the reservation at San Carlos had become a prison of disease and hunger. When the government cut rations again, Thomas had led his family and a small band of others away in the night, seeking the old hunting grounds. For 3 moons they had lived as their ancestors did, until the cavalry found them. Only Thomas survived the massacre. The soldiers had left him alive, perhaps thinking the sight of his slaughtered family was punishment enough. They were right. Afterward came the whiskey, the gambling, the slow surrender of dignity for survival. He drifted between mining camps and frontier towns, treated as either a curiosity or a threat. The carved flute, a gift from his father, remained silent against his skin, a mute witness to his decline. "Where will you go?" Nara asked, breaking into his thoughts. Thomas surveyed the dusty landscape. "North, to sell this bull." "Thunder," she corrected. "His name is Thunder." Thomas nearly laughed. "Thunder? This broken animal?" "He is not broken," she said with unexpected firmness. "His sight is different, not gone. He sees things others miss." From the trading post behind them, Thomas noticed Marshal Clark watching their departure, his pale eyes calculating beneath the brim of his hat. The white man ran the trading post like a spider in its web, trapping natives in debt and desperation. It was Clark who had goaded Thomas into the bet, surprising everyone by actually honoring it when Thomas won. "That man," Thomas nodded toward Clark. "Why did he let me win the bull?" Nara's eyes narrowed. "Because he thinks you won nothing of value." As they walked away from the trading post, Thomas felt Clark's gaze boring into his back. Something wasn't right about the situation, but survival demanded movement, not answers. The bull Thunder followed Nara obediently while Thomas walked ahead, scouting the path into the scrubland. The sun beat down mercilessly. Thomas removed the flute from inside his shirt and studied its polished surface, the finger holes worn smooth from generations of use. His father had taught him to play when he was just a boy, explaining how music connected their people to both earth and sky. "You play?" Nara asked, noticing the instrument. "Not anymore," Thomas replied, tucking it away. As they made camp that first night, Thomas realized he had gained not just a bull but an unexpected companion in Nara. Her movements were efficient and practiced as she gathered firewood and prepared a small meal from supplies in her own bundle. Thunder rested nearby, his massive form silhouetted against the darkening sky. Thomas watched them both, these strange additions to his solitary existence. He had planned to win something of value at the trading post, supplies, a weapon, anything to trade further north. Instead, he had acquired complications. Yet something about the woman's quiet dignity stirred memories of who he had once been. Perhaps, like the silent flute against his chest, some things remained unbroken beneath the surface. Nara had watched the Apache for 3 days before he made the bet. From her hiding place behind the trading post storage shed, she observed his proud stance that contradicted his ragged appearance. Even in defeat, he carried himself like a man who once commanded respect. Now, as they made camp for the second night, she kept the blanket wrapped around her face, secured with leather ties. Beneath her layers, a single beaded hair tie remained hidden, the last beautiful thing she owned, a reminder of who she had been before the fire. "You haven't told me which tribe you're from," Thomas said as he built the small fire. Nara hesitated. "Mescalero, from the eastern mountains." "You're far from home." "Home rejected me," she said simply, reaching out to stroke Thunder's massive flank. The bull lowered himself to the ground beside her with a contented snort. Thomas studied them. "How did you come to know this animal?" Nara's fingers traced patterns in Thunder's coarse hair. "We recognize each other's pain. When Clark's men brought him to the trading post, they beat him for sport, called him worthless because of his eye." Her voice hardened. "People fear what they don't understand, what looks different." In the firelight, Thomas noticed how she always turned the same side of her face away from him. He didn't press. "They planned to slaughter him," she continued, "but he broke free and injured 2 men. Instead of killing him, Clark kept him as a curiosity, something to taunt and bet upon." Her voice softened. "I brought him water at night, spoke to him, listened. And he listened back," Thomas said, not mockingly. Nara nodded. "Animals see truth more clearly than people. They don't judge by appearance." The words hung between them. Thomas poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "Why did you approach me at the trading post?" he asked finally. Nara's fingers found the beaded hair tie hidden beneath her wraps, a small comfort. "Thunder chose you." Thomas laughed bitterly. "An animal chose me? He stood calmly when you approached. With others, he charges or retreats." She paused. "You both carry similar wounds." Thomas fell silent, the truth of her words settling uncomfortably. From beneath her blanket, Nara studied this man who fate had connected to her. His hands, though rough, moved with unexpected gentleness. Healer's hands. She had heard whispers about Thomas Red Hawk at the trading post, how he had once been a medicine man before falling into disgrace. Her own disgrace had come differently. The fire that scarred her face had spared her life but marked her as cursed among her people. The burns covered the left side of her face and neck, pulling her mouth into a permanent half-grimace. Children cried at the sight. Adults averted their eyes or made signs against evil. Only her grandmother had shown kindness, crafting the beaded hair tie as a reminder that beauty remained within her. "Our scars tell our stories," she had said before death took her. "Find someone who listens to your story." After her grandmother's passing, the tribe's rejection became complete. Nara wandered west, taking odd jobs at ranches and settlements where she could work with animals while keeping her face covered. At the trading post, she had found reluctant acceptance as long as she remained useful and unseen. Then came Thunder and now Thomas. "We should reach the foothills by tomorrow evening," Thomas said, breaking the silence. "There's a stream there. Good grazing for the bull." "Thunder," Nara corrected gently. Thomas's mouth twitched. "Thunder," he conceded. As night deepened around them, Nara felt a curious lightness. For years, she had spoken only to animals or to herself. Words felt strange in her mouth, like tools long disused. Yet something about Thomas made speech come easier. In the darkness, she loosened the blanket slightly, allowing the cool night air to touch her scarred skin. Thunder shifted beside her, his massive body a wall of warmth and protection. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time in years, she wasn't completely alone. Dawn broke with Thunder's low, rumbling breath. Thomas watched as Nara approached the massive animal with a braided rope halter in her hands. The craftsmanship was evident, strands of horsehair and plant fiber woven into an intricate pattern, designed for guidance rather than control. "You made this?" Thomas asked. Nara nodded. The ropes they used cut into his flesh. Her fingers traced a healed scar on Thunder's broad neck. "He needs to be led, not forced." As she fitted the halter, Thomas studied the bull more carefully. Despite his scarred hide and clouded eye, Thunder's bloodline was evident in his powerful shoulders and deep chest. Spanish breeding mixed with the hardiness of frontier stock. This was no ordinary animal. "He was born on a ranch south of here," Nara said, seeming to read his thoughts. "The prized bull of a wealthy rancher named Hernandez. What happened to his eye?" "Another bull. A fight for dominance." She touched the area around Thunder's clouded eye gently. "He won the fight but lost part of his sight. The rancher considered him diminished, no longer perfect." Thomas understood too well how quickly value could be lost in the eyes of others. "Hernandez sold him to traders who brought him north," Nara continued. "They discovered he wouldn't respond to their commands, called him stubborn, broken." "And you?" Thomas asked. "How did you come to be his keeper?" Nara's hands stilled on the halter. "I wasn't his keeper. I was invisible at the trading post, the veiled woman who did laundry and tended gardens. When they brought Thunder in, they kept him penned behind the stables." Her voice softened. "At night, I would sit near his pen and speak to him, not with words at first, but with presence." Thomas nodded. He remembered similar techniques from his healing days, how sometimes silence communicated more than speech. One night, he was thrashing against the pen, bleeding from their whips, Nara said. "I opened the gate, thinking he might run, find freedom. Instead, he calmed when I approached. A rare smile touched her eyes above the blanket. We recognized something in each other. And Clark allowed this arrangement? Clark saw an opportunity, a spectacle. The veiled woman who tamed the killer bull." Her voice hardened. "He made wagers on whether Thunder would turn on me." Thomas felt a flash of disgust. He had seen similar entertainments in frontier towns, the exploitation of both animals and people for others' amusement. "Yesterday wasn't the first time he's been bet," Nara added. "Just the first time anyone won him." Thunder lowered his massive head, nudging Nara's shoulder with surprising gentleness. The contrast between his power and his tenderness struck Thomas. This animal could easily kill a man, yet he followed Nara with the devotion of a lamb. "He needs water," Thomas said, gathering his few possessions. "There's a creek about 2 miles ahead." As they walked, Thomas noticed how Thunder positioned himself between Nara and the open desert, his good eye scanning the horizon. Not just tame but protective. The bull moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to test the air with flared nostrils. At the creek, Thunder drank deeply while Thomas refilled his water skin. Nara adjusted the braided halter, her movements practiced and efficient. "Why did you agree to come with me?" Thomas asked suddenly. "You could have refused. And what would have happened to Thunder?" She looked directly at him. You would have sold him, or abandoned him when he proved difficult. Thomas couldn't deny it. And now we travel together until paths diverge. Her tone suggested she expected that divergence sooner rather than later. Thomas studied the braided halter, the care evident in each woven strand. You believe damaged things can be repaired. It wasn't a question, but Nara answered anyway. Not repaired, transformed. She touched Thunder's scarred flank. His blindness taught him to sense what others miss. Wounds can become strengths, Thomas Redhawk. Even yours. Thomas turned away, uncomfortable with her insight. Ahead lay the foothills and beyond them, mountains where he might lose himself or perhaps find himself again at by midday. The sun beat down mercilessly as they approached the foothills. Thomas reached inside his worn leather pouch and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. A torn map of Apache territories, yellowed with age and missing its eastern portion. The remaining fragment showed mountain ranges, water sources, and symbols marking sacred places known only to his people. We'll follow this creek north, Thomas said, tracing a faint blue line with his finger. There's a trading settlement 2 days' journey where I can sell the bull. Thunder, Nara corrected quietly. Thomas sighed. Where I can sell Thunder, he amended, though his plan remained unchanged. The animal would bring good money, enough perhaps to buy supplies and continue northward to find distant relatives who had escaped the reservation years ago. Nara said nothing, but her silence carried weight. She walked alongside Thunder, occasionally murmuring words too soft for Thomas to hear. The terrain grew more challenging as they left the flatlands. Rocky outcroppings provided welcome shade, and the vegetation thickened near the creek. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the distant mountains. We should make camp, Thomas advised, eyeing the sky. Rain's coming. They found shelter beneath an overhang of rock. Thomas gathered wood for a small fire while Nara tended to Thunder, removing his halter and checking his hooves for stones. The bull settled nearby, his massive form blocking part of the wind that had begun to pick up. As Thomas struck flint to steel, he noticed Nara watching his hands. You were a healer, she said, not a question. Thomas stiffened. Once. Your hands remember, even if you wish to forget. The fire caught, sending up a small flame that Thomas carefully fed with twigs. Some things are better forgotten, he replied. Thunder snorted as if in disagreement, causing Nara to smile beneath her covering. He says you're wrong. Despite himself, Thomas almost smiled. The bull speaks to you now? Not in words, she answered seriously, but in truths. Rain began to fall, a gentle patter that quickly intensified. The overhang kept them mostly dry as they sat in uncomfortable silence. Thomas studied the torn map, tracing the route ahead with his finger. The settlement he sought lay just beyond the map's edge, a place where a half Apache might pass for Mexican if he kept his head down. What will you do? He asked suddenly. When I sell the bull? Nara pulled her blanket tighter. I haven't thought that far ahead. Lightning flashed, illuminating her eyes above the covering, dark, intelligent eyes that had seen too much sorrow. Thunder shifted closer to her, protective. The settlement has a mission, Thomas offered awkwardly. They sometimes take in women who need shelter. Women without faces? Nara's voice was sharp. No, I've seen how missions treat those they deem broken. Thomas looked away. He hadn't meant to offend, yet everything he said seemed to strike a nerve. You could come north, he suggested, surprising himself. Before Nara could respond, Thunder rose suddenly, his good eye fixed on the darkness beyond their shelter. A low rumble built in his chest. Thomas tensed, reaching for his knife. What is it? Someone follows, Nara whispered. They remained frozen, listening to the rain. Minutes passed before Thunder relaxed, though he remained watchful. Probably an animal, Thomas said, but he didn't believe it. The prickle between his shoulder blades, A warrior's instinct told him otherwise. That night, they took turns keeping watch. During his shift, Thomas studied the torn map by firelight, tracing the symbols of his ancestors with a calloused finger. The portion showing the sacred gathering place of his people had been deliberately torn away when soldiers captured him years ago. He had memorized it, but the physical absence felt symbolic of all he had lost. When dawn broke, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. As Thomas rolled the map carefully and returned it to his pouch, he noticed fresh tracks in the mud some distance from their camp. Boot prints. White man's boots. "We need to move," he told Nara, who was already fitting Thunder's halter, "and not toward the settlement." Their eyes met in wordless understanding. Whatever freedom Thomas had thought they possessed was an illusion. They were being hunted. They traveled through the day, avoiding open ground, following game trails that wound through increasingly dense juniper and pine. Thomas set a punishing pace, stopping only when the terrain demanded it. By late afternoon, Thunder's breathing had grown labored, and Thomas himself felt a strange lightheadedness. "We need to rest," Nara insisted as Thomas stumbled slightly. "Not yet," he insisted, but his voice sounded distant to his own ears. The world tilted suddenly, and he found himself on his knees, gravel biting into his palms. Nara was beside him instantly. "You're burning with fever," she said, her cool hand on his forehead. Thomas tried to stand but couldn't summon the strength. "The water," he managed, "from the creek below the trading post." Understanding dawned in Nara's eyes. "Clark's men foul that water deliberately. Many have fallen ill." She looked around, assessing their location. "We must find shelter." Thunder led them to a shallow cave, as if understanding their need. Inside, Thomas collapsed against the cool stone wall. Chills racked his body despite the heat radiating from his skin. Through fever-hazed eyes, he watched Nara gather plants outside the cave entrance. She returned with her arms full of herbs and roots. From her bundle, she removed a small clay pot, weathered and stained from years of use. Thomas recognized it immediately, a medicine pot similar to those his people used for healing preparations. "My grandmother's," Nara explained, seeing his recognition. "She taught me the old ways before she died." She built a small fire near the cave entrance, then added water from her skin to the pot. As it heated, she crushed juniper berries, willow bark, and other plants Thomas was too fevered to identify. The familiar scents transported him to his own healing days, when patience had sought his knowledge and trusted his hands. "Drink," Nara instructed sometime later, holding the pot to his lips. The bitter liquid burned going down, but Thomas knew better than to refuse medicine. Night fell, and with it came delirium. Thomas thrashed against unseen enemies, crying out names of those long dead. Through it all, Nara remained at his side, bathing his forehead with cool cloths, speaking softly in her native tongue. In his fever dreams, Thomas saw his wife and son, their bodies broken by soldiers' bullets. He saw his village burning, heard the screams of his people. But then, strangely, he saw Thunder standing between the horrors and himself, the bull's massive form somehow protective. And beyond Thunder, a woman's silhouette, face uncovered, beautiful despite its scars. When awareness returned, weak morning light filtered through the cave entrance. Thomas found himself covered with Nara's blanket, his head cushioned on folded clothes. The fever had broken, leaving him weak but clear-headed. Nara sat nearby, grinding more herbs in her clay pot. Without her blanket wrapped around her face, Thomas could see her fully for the first time. The left side of her face bore the rippled scars of severe burns, pulling her mouth slightly askew. But her features were strong and dignified, her eyes intelligent. She looked up, caught him watching, and quickly reached for her covering. "Don't," Thomas said, his voice raspy. "Please." Her hands hesitated, then lowered to her lap. Vulnerability and defiance mingled in her expression. "Thank you," Thomas said simply. "For my life." Nara nodded, returning to her work with the clay pot. "The fever has broken, but you need another day of rest. The medicine needs to finish its work." Outside, Thunder's massive form blocked part of the cave entrance as he kept watch. The bull had positioned himself as a sentinel, protecting them both. "He hasn't left that spot since you fell ill," Nara said, following Thomas's gaze. "Even to graze." Thomas studied the animal with new appreciation. "He protects you." "Us," Nara corrected softly. "He protects us." The significance of this wasn't lost on Thomas. For years, he had stood alone against a hostile world. The idea of another being, especially one he had initially dismissed, standing guard over him stirred something long dormant. "When I was delirious," Thomas said hesitantly, "I saw things. Thunder was there, standing between me and darkness." Nara smiled slightly. "The old ones say animals can walk between worlds. Perhaps he did guard your spirit." She offered him more medicine from the clay pot, their fingers brushing during the exchange. For the first time in years, Thomas didn't pull away from human contact. Marshal Clark slammed his fist on the trading post counter, causing dust to rise from the wooden surface. "What do you mean you lost their trail?" The tracker, a weather-beaten man named Hobbs, stood his ground. "Rain washed it clean, sir. They could have gone 3 different directions from that creek." Clark pulled a silver badge from his vest pocket, turning it in the lamplight. Not an official lawman star, but close enough to fool most. A badge he'd commissioned from a silversmith in Tucson to add authority to his position at the trading post. "That bull is worth more than this whole damn outpost," Clark said, his voice lowering to a dangerous pitch. "The Apache doesn't know what he's got. Just a half-blind bull," one of the other men muttered. Clark's laugh held no humor. "That half-blind bull carries the bloodline of the Hernandez fighting stock. Pure Spanish breeding. The ranchers in California would pay a fortune for him." He pinned the silver badge to his vest. "And I'm not losing that fortune to a drunken Apache and a scarred squaw." 3 days later and 50 miles northwest, Thomas stood atop a rocky outcropping, surveying the valley below. His strength had returned quickly after the fever broke, thanks to Nara's medicine and another day of rest. Now they faced a decision. "2 paths," he said as Nara joined him. "The valley leads to the settlement faster, but we'd be exposed. And the other way?" Thomas pointed to a narrow pass between 2 ridges. "Slower but more cover. Game trails most of the way." Thunder snorted below them, pulling at sparse mountain grass. The bull had grown more accepting of Thomas, occasionally allowing him to adjust the braided halter or check his hooves. "The settlement," Nara said hesitantly. "You still plan to sell him there?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. The days of illness and recovery had shifted something between them. He had watched Nara's careful attention, not just to Thunder but to himself. Her knowledge of medicine nearly matched his own, though focused more on plants where his training had included spiritual elements. "We need supplies," he said finally. "And money. There are other ways to get those things." Before Thomas could respond, Thunder's head shot up, nostrils flaring. The bull pawed the ground nervously. Thomas drew Nara down behind a boulder. "Someone's coming." They waited in silence as the sound of horses grew louder. 5 riders appeared in the valley below, moving slowly, clearly searching. At their head rode a man whose pale duster stood out against the landscape. "Clark," Nara whispered. Thomas nodded, noting the silver badge glinting on the man's chest. "Playing lawman now." The riders stopped where the path forked, conferring among themselves. Thomas and Nara remained motionless, Thunder thankfully silent behind them. Finally, the group split, 3 riders taking the valley route toward the settlement, Clark and another man turning toward the mountain pass. "They're covering both paths," Thomas said grimly. Why? Nara's confusion was genuine. Why would they pursue us this far for a bull they considered worthless? Thomas's mind worked through possibilities. Clark doesn't do anything without profit. If he wants thunder this badly, then thunder isn't worthless at all, Nara finished. As the riders disappeared from view, they retreated to a small clearing where thunder waited. The bull sensed their tension, staying unusually still as they gathered their few possessions. We can't take either path now, Thomas said. We need to go where horses can't follow easily. Nara looked to the rugged mountains rising to the north. Up there, with thunder, bulls are surprisingly good climbers when they need to be. Thomas adjusted his medicine pouch. And we need to be. As they prepared to move, Thomas noticed a small object glinting in the grass. He picked it up, a deputy's star, silver-plated but cheaply made, likely fallen from one of Clark's men. Not even a real lawman, Thomas said, showing Nara the badge. Just a man hiding behind false authority. Nara took the badge, studying it. Men like Clark don't need real authority to cause harm. Thomas nodded grimly. He had seen too many white men claiming power they hadn't earned, using it against his people. We'll head northeast, he decided. There's an old Apache hunting path, too narrow for horses in most places. And thunder, if he truly sees what others miss, Thomas said with the ghost of a smile. Then he'll find his footing. Nara recognized the acceptance in Thomas's voice, not just of their situation but of thunder as more than a commodity to be sold. She carefully pocketed the silver badge as they began their ascent, a reminder of the false power pursuing them and the real strength they would need to survive. The ancient hunting path proved even more treacherous than Thomas remembered. Years of disuse had allowed rockslides to obscure sections, while spring rains had washed away others entirely. They climbed steadily through the day, Thomas leading, Nara following with thunder, who navigated the difficult terrain with surprising agility. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered above the peaks. The temperature dropped sharply as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching snow. Storm coming, Thomas called back. We need shelter before nightfall. They pushed forward, muscles aching, lungs burning in the thin mountain air. Thunder struggled on a particularly steep section, his massive weight working against him. The bull snorted in frustration, pawing at loose rock. He can't make it, Nara said, concern etching her features. Thomas studied the path ahead, then removed his leather belt. We'll make a lead rope, guide him together. Working in tandem, they coaxed Thunder up the difficult passage. The bull's trust had grown enough that he allowed Thomas to touch him, even guide him when the footing grew treacherous. As twilight approached, they reached a small plateau. Thomas recognized the stone circle at its center, an old Apache cooking area. His people had used this spot for generations during seasonal hunts. We'll camp here, he decided, protected from the worst of the wind. While Nara gathered what sparse wood could be found at this elevation, Thomas inspected the ancient fire pit. Brushing away years of accumulated debris, his fingers touched something solid. He carefully unearthed a stone knife, its edge still sharp despite years of burial. Apache make? Nara asked, returning with an armful of twisted juniper branches. Thomas nodded, turning the artifact in his hands. Made from obsidian, sacred stone. This knife would have been used for ceremonial preparations. He ran his thumb along the blade's edge. My father had one similar. The storm arrived as night fell. Not rain but stinging sleet that turned to snow as the temperature plummeted. They huddled near the small fire, Thunder positioned to block the worst of the wind. The bull's massive body radiated welcome heat as the world turned white around them. Will they follow us in this? Nara asked, her voice nearly lost in the wind's howl. Not tonight, Thomas replied. But Clark strikes me as a man who doesn't give up easily. They fell silent, watching the flames dance. Thomas turned the stone knife in his hands, memories washing over him. As a boy, he had watched his father use such a knife during hunting rituals, calling upon ancestral spirits for guidance and success. The familiar weight in his palm connected him to those times in a way he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "My father was a medicine man before me," he said suddenly. "When I was 10 summers old, he took me into these mountains for my vision quest." Thomas gestured to the peaks now hidden by darkness and swirling snow. 3 days alone, fasting, praying for the spirits to show me my path. Nara wrapped her blanket tighter, listening. On the 3rd day, a bull elk appeared to me, not in body but in spirit. It became my guide. Thomas smiled faintly. My father was disappointed. He had hoped for eagle or wolf, powerful spirits for a future medicine man. But elk is a healer's spirit, he said, one who carries the burden of others. The irony wasn't lost on either of them as thunder shifted beside them, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "And now another bull guides your path," Nara observed softly. Thomas looked at the stone knife, then at Thunder. Perhaps the spirits have a sense of humor. The storm intensified, forcing them closer to the fire. Without discussion, they moved to sit together, sharing warmth. Thomas offered Nara his coat, but she shook her head. "I have lived through worse cold," she said, but her voice held no self-pity. After a moment's hesitation, Thomas reached for his pack and removed the wooden flute. Nara's eyes widened slightly as he brought it to his lips. The first notes were hesitant, rusty from years of silence. But slowly, the ancient melodies returned, songs of his people, of mountains and stars, of hardship and hope. The music seemed to calm the storm itself, creating a pocket of peace in the howling night. Thunder lowered his great head, seemingly entranced by the sounds. Nara closed her eyes, her face, fully visible in the firelight, relaxed for the first time since Thomas had met her. When the song ended, Thomas lowered the flute, feeling something long knotted within him begin to loosen. "Why did you stop playing?" Nara asked, her voice gentle. Thomas stared into the flames. "Music requires hope," he answered simply. Nara's hand found his in the darkness, her scarred fingers closing around the stone knife they both now held. "And now?" Thomas didn't answer, but when he raised the flute again, the notes carried a strength that echoed against the ancient mountains. Morning revealed a transformed world. Snow blanketed the plateau, softening the harsh landscape into gentle curves of pristine white. They set out early, following game trails now visible only to Thomas's trained eye. By midday, the path descended into a sheltered valley, hidden between towering cliffs. Pine and juniper grew thick here, protected from the harshest mountain winds. A small stream cut through the center, partially frozen but still flowing beneath the ice. "Look!" Nara pointed toward the valley's far end. Nestled against the cliff face stood a small cabin, its log walls weathered gray with age. Thomas approached cautiously, hand on his knife. Trapper's cabin, maybe, or prospector's. The door hung askew on leather hinges. Inside, dust covered the simple furnishings, a rough-hewn table, a bed frame with rotted ropes, a stone fireplace with ashes long cold. Whoever had built this place hadn't returned in many seasons. "We can stay here," Thomas decided, "at least until the weather clears." Thunder wouldn't fit through the narrow doorway, but a lean-to shelter stood adjacent to the cabin, likely once used for pack animals. The bull seemed content with this arrangement, snorting appreciatively at the protection from wind and snow. As Nara swept the cabin floor with a branch broom, she discovered something beneath the dust. A broken mirror, its silver backing tarnished, the glass cracked but mostly intact. She held it up, sunlight from the single window catching the reflective surface. Thomas watched as she studied her reflection, her fingertips gently tracing the scarred side of her face. "My grandmother told me mirrors capture pieces of our souls," Nara said softly. That's why some people fear them. Thomas approached, his own reflection joining hers in the fractured glass. Two damaged people, their images split by the mirror's cracks. And what do you believe? He asked. I believe we see what we choose to see. She set the mirror on the cabin's single shelf. The cracks were always there. The mirror just reveals them. They settled into an unexpected domesticity over the following days. Thomas repaired the door and patched the worst gaps in the walls while Nara fashioned a broom from pine branches and cleaned the long-abandoned space. Thunder kept watch from his shelter, seemingly content with the valley's good grazing despite the snow. On the third morning, Thomas awoke to find Nara already outside, clearing a patch of ground near the stream. What are you doing? He asked, his breath clouding in the cold air. Planting, she replied, showing him a small pouch of seeds. Herbs mostly. Some will grow even in this elevation. Thomas looked skeptical. We won't be here long enough to harvest. Perhaps not. Nara continued her work. But someone else might need them someday. The simple act of planning for a future she might not see struck Thomas deeply. How long had it been since he'd thought beyond the next day, the next meal, the next drink? Since the massacre, he had existed rather than lived, moving through the world like a ghost. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace eating a stew of rabbit and wild onions, Thomas found himself telling Nara about his wife and son. Not their deaths, he couldn't yet speak of that, but their lives. How his wife could identify any bird by its song alone. How his son had shown such promise with healing herbs. He would have become a medicine man, Thomas said, staring into the flames. A better one than me. You were a good healer, Nara said with certainty. Thomas looked up, surprised. How would you know? Your hands, she said simply. They remember, even when you try to forget. Later, as the fire burned low, Thomas caught sight of their reflections in the broken mirror. No longer separate but sitting close, the firelight softening the boundaries between them. For a brief moment, the cracks in the glass seemed to vanish, showing them whole. Outside, Thunder's deep breathing provided a rhythmic counterpoint to the crackling fire. The bull had transformed from burden to guardian, keeping watch over their small sanctuary. Thomas realized with a start that for the first time in years, he felt something like peace. Not happiness, that seemed too distant still, but a quieting of the rage and grief that had driven him for so long. We could stay, he found himself saying. Through winter at least. Nara looked at him, surprised. What about selling Thunder? Finding your people? Thomas glanced toward the lean-to where the bull rested. Some journeys take unexpected paths. In the broken mirror, their reflections sat in companionable silence, fractured but somehow more complete than they had been before. Days melted into weeks as winter tightened its grip on the hidden valley. Thomas and Nara fell into a rhythm of shared tasks. He hunting and maintaining their shelter, she tending to Thunder and preserving food for the coldest days ahead. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, the space between them gradually diminishing. During these quiet hours, Nara worked on a handcrafted blanket, her fingers weaving together strands of wool from Thomas's old coat and plant fibers she had gathered and processed. The blanket grew slowly, each new row a testament to patience and care. My mother taught me this pattern, she explained one evening, showing Thomas how the diamond shapes emerged from seemingly random threads. It tells the story of mountains and valleys, the journey of life. Thomas watched her hands, graceful despite the scarring that extended to her wrists. My people have similar patterns. The designs look different but mean the same things. Perhaps all patterns tell the same stories, Nara suggested, just in different voices. On days when snow made hunting impossible, Thomas taught Nara how to use the stone knife for self-defense. Her movements were initially hesitant but grew more confident under his guidance. Like this, he said, standing behind her to adjust her grip. The strength comes not from the arm but from the center. Nara nodded, concentrating on the lesson. When she successfully blocked his slow practice strike, her face lit with rare pride. Thomas found himself smiling in response, the expression feeling foreign on his face. In turn, Nara shared her knowledge of plant medicine, showing Thomas herbs he hadn't encountered and preparations his training hadn't included. Some techniques she had learned from her grandmother, others discovered through her own experimentation. This one, she explained, crushing a pungent leaf between her fingers, stops bleeding almost instantly. I found it after watching deer eat it when wounded. Thomas recognized the wisdom in her approach, observation rather than tradition alone. It reminded him of his father's teachings about medicine being a living knowledge, always growing. You would have made a fine medicine woman among my people, he told her. And you would have been respected among mine, she replied. Before my scarring made them fear spirits they didn't understand. The handcrafted blanket grew larger as they shared more of themselves. Thomas spoke of his training as a healer, the years spent learning which plants healed and which harmed, which spirits to call upon for different ailments. Nara described her childhood before the fire, her gift with animals that had both amazed and unsettled her tribe. Outside, Thunder grew stronger with regular feeding and care. The bull often stood guard near the cabin, his massive form a reassuring presence. Sometimes, Thomas would find Nara speaking softly to Thunder in her native tongue, the bull listening with what seemed like genuine understanding. One particularly cold night, as wind howled outside their shelter, Thomas played his flute while Nara worked on her blanket. The melody, once halting, now flowed smoothly, a song about spring returning after the longest winter. When he finished, Thomas found Nara watching him, her eyes bright in the firelight. I've never heard that song before, she said. Because I just created it, Thomas admitted. He hadn't composed music since before the massacre, hadn't felt worthy of the creative act. Nara set aside her weaving and moved closer to him, her shoulder touching his. Play it again? As the notes filled their small shelter, Thomas felt her hand find his free one, her fingers intertwining with his. The touch, simple yet profound, caused his playing to falter momentarily before finding a deeper resonance. Later, as they prepared for sleep on opposite sides of the cabin as had become their custom, Nara approached Thomas with the handcrafted blanket, still unfinished but large enough to be useful. It's not complete, she said, but neither are we. She placed the blanket over him, then hesitated before lying down beside him, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough to share warmth. Thunder's rhythmic breathing from the lean-to provided a comforting backdrop as they lay in silence, neither speaking of this new intimacy but both acknowledging its significance. Under the handcrafted blanket that told the story of mountains and valleys, journeys and homecomings, Thomas reached for Nara's hand in the darkness. Her fingers met his halfway. The valley had begun to show the first subtle signs of spring, patches of earth appearing through melting snow, buds forming on the juniper bushes, when their peace was shattered. Thomas was checking snare lines when he heard it, Thunder's warning bellow echoing through the trees. He ran toward the cabin, heart pounding. Through the trees, he spotted 5 riders approaching from the valley's narrow entrance. Clark at their lead, the false silver badge glinting on his chest. Thomas circled wide, staying hidden as he made his way to where Nara worked in her small garden. He caught her arm, pulling her into the cover of trees. "Clark," he whispered. 5 men. Her eyes widened. "How did they find us?" "Doesn't matter now. We need to move." They crept toward the lean-to where Thunder waited, already agitated by the approaching strangers. The bull snorted nervously as Thomas and Nara gathered what few essential possessions they could carry. "There's a path up the eastern cliff," Thomas said. "Difficult, but passable." Before they could reach it, a shout rang out. "Check the outbuilding." 2 riders approached the lean-to. Thunder, sensing the threat, lowered his massive head and charged without warning. The men's horses reared in terror as the bull burst from the shelter, creating instant chaos. "Run!" Thomas pushed Nara toward the cliff path as gunshots split the air. They fled through the trees, the sounds of men shouting and horses neighing behind them. Thunder's bellows echoed through the valley as he continued his attack, buying them precious time. At the base of the cliff, Nara hesitated. "Thunder. He's giving us a chance," Thomas said grimly. "We can't waste it." The climb was treacherous, loose rock giving way beneath their hands. Halfway up, Thomas pulled Nara into a shallow cave barely visible from below. They pressed against the back wall, breathing hard, listening to the commotion in the valley. "They're searching the cabin," Thomas whispered, peering cautiously out. From their vantage point, they could see men ransacking their shelter, tossing their few possessions outside. Nara clutched Thomas's arm. "Where's Thunder?" They scanned the valley floor anxiously until they spotted him. The bull had been cornered near the stream, surrounded by 3 mounted men with ropes. Even as they watched, a lasso settled around Thunder's neck. The bull fought furiously but couldn't break free from multiple restraints. Clark emerged from the cabin, something in his hand catching the sunlight. He examined it, then tossed it aside, the broken mirror now shattered completely. "Damn Apache," Clark's voice carried in the clear mountain air. "Thought you'd stolen my property?" The men secured Thunder to a sturdy pine, then continued searching the valley methodically. One discovered the garden Nara had tended so carefully and trampled it under his horse's hooves. As dusk approached, the searchers built a fire near the cabin. Clark sat before it, smoking a pipe as he issued orders to his men. The smoke drifted upward, a beacon in the growing darkness. "They're setting up camp," Thomas whispered. "They know we haven't gone far. They're using Thunder as bait," Nara realized, her voice breaking. "They know we won't leave him." Thomas watched the men below, calculating their chances. 5 armed men against his single knife. Impossible odds. "We'll wait until they sleep," he decided. "Then I'll go down." "We'll go down," Nara corrected firmly. Thomas shook his head. "Too dangerous." "He's as much mine as yours," she insisted. Their whispered argument was interrupted by movement below. One of Clark's men approached Thunder with a waterskin, but instead of offering drink, he taunted the bull, splashing water just out of reach. Thunder lunged against his restraints, nearly breaking free. The man jumped back, cursing. Clark shouted at his subordinate, then approached Thunder himself. He studied the bull with calculating eyes, running his hand along Thunder's flank in a gesture of ownership that made Nara tense beside Thomas. Night fell completely, stars emerging in the clear mountain sky. 3 men slept while 2 kept watch, occasionally stoking the fire. Clark remained awake longest, smoking his pipe by the flames before finally settling on a bedroll near the cabin door. Hours later, when the camp had fallen silent except for the guards' occasional movements, Thomas and Nara crept from their hiding place. At the cave's entrance, Thomas's foot dislodged something. A pipe, carved from dark wood with a silver band. Clark must have dropped it during the search. Thomas picked it up, examining the break in its stem. "A man who treats his possessions carelessly," he murmured, "will never truly own anything of value." He slipped the broken pipe into his pouch, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what they fought against. Then, with a shared look of determination, they began their dangerous descent toward the camp and their captured friend. They descended in silence, each footfall carefully placed to avoid dislodging stones. The waning moon provided just enough light to navigate while keeping them mostly hidden in shadow. At the valley floor, they separated, Thomas circling toward the cabin, Nara moving toward Thunder. From behind a massive pine, Thomas studied the camp. 2 guards remained awake, one near the cabin entrance, another pacing the perimeter. Clark and the others slept, their forms dark lumps around the dying fire. Thomas closed his eyes, summoning skills long unused. In his youth, he had trained not just as a healer but as a warrior. Apache scouts were legendary for moving unseen, becoming one with the land. He pulled the stone knife from his belt, feeling its ancient power. With deliberate slowness, he gathered a handful of small stones. The first he threw far to the east, where it clattered convincingly against rock. The guard nearest Thunder turned toward the sound, hand on his pistol. Thomas's second stone landed closer to the cabin, drawing the other guard's attention. The man moved cautiously toward the noise, leaving his post temporarily. It was the opening they needed. Thomas slipped from shadow to shadow until he reached the supply packs left carelessly near the horses. His fingers found what he sought, a coiled rawhide lasso, superior to the rope currently restraining Thunder. Across the camp, he glimpsed Nara kneeling beside the bull, her hands working to loosen his bindings while keeping him calm. Thunder remained eerily silent, as if understanding the need for stealth. Thomas needed a bigger distraction. Near the horses, he found a half-empty bottle of whiskey, liquid courage for men far from civilization. He tore a strip from his shirt, stuffed it into the bottle's neck, then used flint from his pouch to create a spark. The makeshift torch flared to life. Thomas hurled it toward the far side of the camp, where dried pine needles caught immediately. Flames leapt upward, startling the horses into panicked movement. "Fire!" one guard shouted, running toward the blaze. Clark and his men scrambled from their bedrolls in confusion. Thomas used the chaos to sprint toward Nara and Thunder, the rawhide lasso in hand. "The binding won't break," Nara whispered urgently as he reached them. Thomas worked quickly with the stone knife, sawing through the ropes securing Thunder to the tree. The bull remained unnaturally still, his good eye fixed on Thomas as if measuring his worth. The last rope gave way just as shouts indicated the fire was being brought under control. Thomas looped the rawhide lasso loosely around Thunder's neck, not to control but to guide. "This way," he murmured, leading them toward the stream where shadows were deepest. They had almost reached the water when a shout rang out. "The bull! They're taking the bull!" A gunshot cracked through the night. Thomas felt a searing pain across his upper arm but kept moving. Behind them, men scrambled for weapons and horses. "We'll never outrun them," Nara said as they splashed across the shallow stream. Thomas handed her the rawhide lasso. "You will with Thunder. Follow the stream north. There's a box canyon with a hidden exit only Apache know." "You're coming with us," she insisted. "I'll lead them away first." He pressed the stone knife into her hand. "Wait for me at the canyon." Before she could protest, Thomas turned and ran in the opposite direction, making enough noise to draw attention. He heard Clark shouting orders, horses splashing through the stream. Following him, not Nara and Thunder. His plan was working. Thomas ran as he hadn't in years, calling upon reserves of strength he'd thought long depleted. The bullet graze on his arm burned with each movement, but he pushed the pain aside. Behind him, hoofbeats grew closer. He veered sharply into dense underbrush, the branches whipping his face. A natural gully provided momentary cover, allowing him to double back toward the stream at a different point. The night dissolved into a deadly game of hunter and hunted. Thomas employed every trick he had learned as a scout, walking backward in his own tracks, using streams to hide his trail, creating false paths to confuse his pursuers. Dawn found him miles from the cabin, crouched in a rocky outcropping. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but Thomas knew Clark wouldn't give up easily. The man's obsession with Thunder had become clear. The bull represented wealth beyond the trading post's meager offerings. As morning light revealed his surroundings, Thomas examined his wound. The bullet had carved a deep furrow along his bicep, still seeping blood. He bound it with a strip of cloth, knowing infection posed a greater threat than blood loss. His thoughts turned to Nara and Thunder. Had they reached the box canyon? Would they wait as he'd asked, or continue northward without him? The rawhide lasso he'd given Nara was more than a tool. It represented his trust in her ability to lead when he could not. Summoning his remaining strength, Thomas began the long journey toward the rendezvous point, praying to ancestors he'd long ignored that he would find them waiting. The box canyon appeared as Thomas had described, high walls of striated rock with a narrow entrance that widened into a sheltered space. Nara led Thunder inside as dawn broke, searching the shadows for any sign of Thomas. "He'll come," she told Thunder, though uncertainty gnawed at her. The bull seemed to understand, settling near the canyon entrance, his good eye watching the path they had traveled. Nara used the time to gather what plants she could find. The early spring offered meager pickings, but she located enough to create a small poultice for when, not if, Thomas returned wounded. In her bundle, she found a small clay pot of burn salve she had made months earlier, its surface crusted with age but the medicine beneath still potent. As the day progressed with no sign of Thomas, Nara's worry deepened. Thunder grew restless, occasionally rising to pace before returning to his vigilant position. When dusk approached, Nara heard it, the uneven shuffle of someone struggling to walk. She peered cautiously around the canyon entrance to see Thomas stumbling toward them, one hand pressed to his bleeding arm, his face ashen with exhaustion. "Thomas!" She rushed to him as his knees buckled. "Told you I'd come," he managed before collapsing against her. Inside the canyon, she laid him on a bed of pine boughs, examining his wound in the fading light. The bullet graze had opened wider during his journey, the edges angry and hot to the touch. "Fever's starting," she murmured, reaching for her herbs and the burn salve. Thunder moved closer, his massive form blocking the cooling evening air, providing warmth to Thomas's shivering body. Through the night, Nara tended the wound, applying poultices to draw out infection and offering water when Thomas was lucid enough to drink. During his fever dreams, he called out names she didn't recognize, his wife, his son, his father, and once, with surprising clarity, her own name. "Nara," he said, his eyes opening briefly to focus on her face. "I see you." The simple statement held such recognition that Nara's hands stilled on his forehead. He truly saw her, not just her scars or her skills, but her complete self. By morning, the fever had broken. Thomas woke fully, weakened but clear-eyed. He watched as Nara prepared a fresh dressing for his wound, mixing herbs with the burn salve. "That smells familiar," he noted. "Burn salve," she explained. "My own preparation. For wounds like these?" Nara hesitated, then shook her head. "For wounds like mine." Thomas watched her quietly, waiting. "I was 15. She began, her voice soft but steady. "Our village was celebrating the harvest when the cooking fire spread to a dwelling where 3 children slept. Her hands continued working, measuring herbs into the salve with practiced precision. Everyone ran from the flames. I ran toward them." She touched her scarred cheek briefly. "I managed to bring all 3 children out alive, but the burning thatch fell as I carried the last child." "You saved them," Thomas said, "and became a monster in their eyes." Bitterness edged her words. "Burns like these, they believed they were a sign from angry spirits, that I was marked as cursed. Your own people rejected you for an act of courage?" Thomas's disbelief was evident. "Fear makes people cruel." Nara applied the mixed salve to his wound with gentle fingers. "Even the parents of the children I saved could not look at me afterward. They said I had stolen their children's spirits in the fire, that my scarred face would bring misfortune to all who saw it." She sat back, wiping her hands on a cloth. "My grandmother alone stood by me. She taught me to make this salve, to heal my own wounds when others turned away." Thomas caught her hand, his thumb brushing over her scarred knuckles. "Those who turned away were blind." Nara looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since they'd met. No covering hid her face now. The morning light revealed every ridge and hollow of her scars. "And you?" she asked quietly. "Do you see with clear eyes, Thomas Red Hawk?" He reached up, his fingers gently tracing the contours of her scarred cheek. "I see courage," he said simply. "I see beauty." The moment hung between them, fragile and perfect. Then Thomas did what he had wanted to do for weeks. He drew her closer and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Nara responded, her hands coming up to frame his face, the kiss deepened into something neither had expected to find in this life. Acceptance without condition, desire without reservation. When they finally parted, Thomas kept his forehead pressed to hers. "I was lost," he whispered, "until thunder brought me to you." Outside their sheltered canyon, dawn painted the sky in colors they had both forgotten existed in the world. They remained in the box canyon for 5 days, allowing Thomas's wound to heal sufficiently for travel. Each day strengthened the bond between them, simple touches and shared glances communicating what words could not yet fully express. On the 6th morning, Thomas studied the sky with concern. "Weather's changing. We need to move before the mountain passes close again." Nara nodded, packing their meager supplies. "Where will we go?" Thomas hesitated, then reached for his medicine pouch. From it, he withdrew the torn map, smoothing it against a flat rock. "Here," he pointed to a symbol near the map's ragged edge. "A sacred place to my people. Few outsiders know of it." "How far?" 6 days' journey. Difficult terrain. His eyes met hers. "But we'd reach it before the heavy snows." The unspoken question hung between them. Was this a temporary refuge or something more permanent? Nara knelt beside him, her finger tracing the route he had indicated. "This place, would others of your tribe be there?" "Perhaps. Small family groups sometimes winter there." Thomas's expression softened. "They would welcome a healer returning to them." "And a scarred woman from another tribe? A half-blind bull?" Thomas covered her hand with his. "They would welcome my family." The word settled between them, weighty with meaning. Family, something neither had dared hope for again. That night, as Nara slept, Thomas worked by firelight on a gift he had been crafting in secret moments. Using a hide from his earlier hunting and sinew from his supplies, he fashioned a pair of moccasins sized for Nara's feet. His fingers, once skilled at such work, remembered their training. He incorporated traditional Apache designs that spoke of protection and journeying, of finding home after long wandering. When completed, the moccasins represented not just practical footwear for the difficult journey ahead, but his commitment to walking beside her. At dawn, he presented them to Nara. "The path will be rough. These will help." Nara took the moccasins, running her fingers over the intricate patterns. "These are ceremonial designs," she said, recognizing their significance even from another tribe's traditions. "Yes." Thomas didn't elaborate, but his meaning was clear. Nara removed her worn boots and slipped on the moccasins. They fit perfectly, as if he had measured her feet while she slept, which she realized he probably had. "Thank you," she said simply, standing to feel how they conformed to her feet. Thomas nodded, then turned to prepare Thunder for the journey. The bull had grown even more accepting of his touch, allowing Thomas to check his hooves and adjust his halter without resistance. They departed the canyon as the sun crested the eastern ridges, following game trails that only Thomas's experienced eye could discern. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they ascended into higher elevations. Thunder navigated the difficult passages with surprising agility, sometimes seeming to find the path before Thomas did. On the 3rd day, they crested a ridge that offered views stretching to the horizon. Thomas paused, gazing northward toward their destination. Nara stood beside him, the new moccasins proving their worth on the rocky ground. "What is this sacred place called?" she asked. "In my language, it means Valley of Ancestors," Thomas replied. "A place where the spirits of those who came before remain close. Your wife and son, their spirits would be there?" Thomas nodded, unexpected emotion tightening his throat. "Among others." Nara took his hand, her scarred fingers intertwining with his. Then they will know you have found your way back. That night, as they made camp in the shelter of a rocky overhang, Thomas removed the medicine pouch from around his neck. The leather container had been his constant companion since boyhood, holding sacred items and personal treasures. "This belongs to a healer," he said, placing it in Nara's hands. "I stopped being that man long ago, but perhaps together we can become something new." Nara understood the significance. This was not just a gift but a promise, as binding in its way as any ceremonial vow. She accepted the pouch with appropriate reverence. "I will keep it until you are ready to wear it again," she said, her words acknowledging that his healing journey was not yet complete. As they settled beside the fire, Thunder keeping watch nearby, Thomas spotted movement on a distant ridge, riders following their trail. Even at this distance, he recognized the pale duster of Marshal Clark. "They haven't given up," he said quietly, not wanting to alarm Nara unnecessarily. She followed his gaze, her expression hardening. "Neither have we." Thomas looked at her feet, clad in the moccasins he had made, ready for whatever path lay ahead. "No," he agreed, "we haven't." 6 days of arduous travel brought them to a narrow pass between towering granite walls. Thomas paused, placing his hand on the sun-warmed stone. "We're here," he said quietly. "Beyond this passage lies the Valley of Ancestors." Nara sensed his hesitation. "Are you ready?" Thomas took a deep breath. "It's been 7 years since I left this place. I was a different man then." Thunder nudged Thomas's shoulder gently, as if offering encouragement. The bull had become increasingly attuned to their emotions during their journey. "The man you were is still within you," Nara said. "He just needed to find his way home." Together they walked through the passage, emerging into a vista that took Nara's breath away. The valley spread before them, sheltered on all sides by protective mountains. A clear stream wound through meadows dotted with ancient oaks. At the valley's center stood several traditional Apache wickiups, though no smoke rose from their cooking fires. "It's empty," Thomas observed, relief and disappointment mingling in his voice. "The families must have moved to lower ground for hunting season." They made their way down the gentle slope. Thunder followed, his good eye taking in the new surroundings with apparent approval. The valley offered plentiful grazing and natural protection, ideal for all three of them. As they approached the dwelling area, Thomas grew quiet, memories washing over him. Here, he had completed his training as a medicine man. Here, he had brought his young wife to start their family. Here, he had last seen his father alive. At the largest wickiup, Thomas stopped, his hand reaching out to touch the weathered support pole. "This was my family's dwelling," he said, his voice tight with emotion. Nara stood respectfully aside, allowing him this moment of reconnection. As Thomas moved slowly around the structure, she noticed something caught in the woven branches near the entrance. A single eagle feather, somehow preserved despite years of weather. When Thomas completed his circuit of the dwelling, Nara offered him the feather. "It was waiting for you." Thomas accepted it with reverence, examining its perfect form. Among his people, eagle feathers were sacred objects, often used in healing ceremonies to connect the physical and spiritual worlds. "My father wore such a feather in his hair during important rituals," Thomas said. "To find one here, now." "A sign," Nara suggested. "The ancestors welcome your return." Thomas nodded, emotion making speech difficult. The eagle feather trembled slightly in his hand, not from wind, but from the weight of meaning it carried. That evening, Thomas built a small fire in the central gathering area. From his pouch, he removed dried herbs and the stone knife, preparations for a ceremony he had not performed since before the massacre. "Will you join me?" he asked Nara. She nodded, sitting across from him at the fire. Thunder settled nearby, his massive form silhouetted against the deepening twilight. Thomas began to sing in his native tongue, soft at first, then with growing confidence. The ancient songs honored those who had passed into the spirit world, acknowledging their continued presence in the land of the living. As darkness fell completely, Thomas placed the eagle feather in Nara's hand, then guided her to add it to the small fire. Together they watched as it curled briefly in the heat before being consumed, its essence rising with the smoke toward the star-filled sky. "My wife," Thomas said, his voice steady now. "My son, my father, all those lost." He looked at Nara across the flames. "I release my guilt at surviving. I honor their memory by living fully again." Nara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She understood the magnitude of this moment. Thomas confronting his deepest pain, beginning to heal what had seemed unhealable. Later, as they sat close together beside the dying fire, Thomas spoke of his plans for rebuilding. The wickiup would need repairs before winter set in. The valley provided everything they would need: game, water, shelter, medicinal plants. "We could make a life here," he said, the question implicit in his tone. Nara leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think we already have." The comfortable silence that followed was broken when Nara placed her hand over her abdomen, a gesture Thomas couldn't miss. "Thomas," she said quietly, "there is something you should know." She took his hand and placed it where hers had been. "Our family may be growing sooner than we planned." His eyes widened in understanding. "A child?" Nara nodded. "I've suspected for several weeks. Now I'm certain." Joy and fear battled across Thomas's features. The prospect of fatherhood, something he had thought forever lost to him, now restored in this sacred place. Before he could respond, Thunder rose suddenly to his feet, facing south toward the pass they had traveled through. The bull's posture was alert, warning. Thomas stood, hand moving to the knife at his belt. In the distance, the faint glow of torches marked the approach of riders in the darkness. Dawn revealed what Thunder had sensed hours before. Clark and 4 men had made camp just outside the narrow pass leading to the valley. They had not yet ventured inside, perhaps wary of entering unfamiliar territory in darkness. Thomas surveyed the situation from a hidden vantage point on the valley's edge. "They'll come soon," he told Nara when he returned to the dwelling area. "They're preparing their weapons." Nara continued grinding herbs with steady hands. "How many?" 5, including Clark. "All armed." Thomas's expression hardened. "They won't take Thunder. Or you." "Nor you," Nara added firmly. She gestured to the small pouches she had prepared, filled with medicinal mixtures. "These may help." Thomas examined them, powders that could temporarily blind, pastes that would burn the skin, herbs that induced confusion when inhaled. Weapons of a different sort, but effective in the right circumstances. "We have advantages they don't," Thomas said, mind working through strategies. "Knowledge of this place. Thunder. Your medicines." He paused. "And they don't expect me to fight as Apache." From a hidden storage cache near his family's wickiup, untouched since his departure years ago, Thomas had retrieved a small ceramic container. Now he opened it, revealing a mixture of red ochre, black charcoal, and white clay, traditional war paint of his people. "I have not worn these colors since I was a young warrior," he said, dipping his fingers into the mixture. With practiced movements, he began applying the paint to his face in patterns that held deep meaning, symbols of protection, strength, and the watchful eyes of ancestors. Nara watched in respectful silence as Thomas transformed before her. The paint seemed to awaken something long dormant within him, the proud Apache warrior who had existed before grief and whiskey had buried him. When he finished, Thomas looked to Nara. "Will you wear the marks of your people as well?" She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "My grandmother taught me the patterns of our tribe. I never thought I would have reason to wear them." Thomas offered her the paints. With careful movements, Nara applied her own tribal markings, different from Apache designs but carrying similar power. The paint covered her scars, not hiding them but incorporating them into the sacred patterns, making them part of her strength rather than her shame. While they prepared, Thunder remained unusually calm, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Thomas approached the bull, speaking softly in Apache as he adorned Thunder's flanks with handprints in red ochre, marking him as under protection of the tribe. "He understands more than most men," Thomas observed as Thunder stood perfectly still for the ritual markings. "Because he listens with his heart, not just his ears," Nara replied. Their preparations continued throughout the morning. Thomas set strategic traps along the likely approach routes, not to kill but to disorient and separate their pursuers. Nara positioned her medicinal pouches where they could be quickly accessed. In the early afternoon, Thomas and Nara stood together at the center of the dwelling circle, formally committing themselves to each other in a private ceremony that combined elements from both their tribal traditions. "I take you as my wife," Thomas said, placing the medicine pouch around Nara's neck. "Before the ancestors and spirits of this valley." "I take you as my husband," Nara responded, pressing her palm to his chest above his heart. "Before all seen and unseen forces." The simplicity of their vows belied their depth. In that moment, their shared journey, from broken outcasts to partners facing an uncertain future together, felt complete, regardless of what might come next. Thunder witnessed their union, standing as sentinel nearby. When the ceremony concluded, the bull approached, gently nudging both Thomas and Nara as if offering his own blessing. As the sun began its westward descent, they made final preparations. Thomas secured essential supplies in a hidden location in case they needed to flee. Nara prepared a special medicine bundle for protection of their unborn child. "If we become separated," Thomas instructed, "follow the stream to its source. There's a cave there, known only to my family." Nara nodded, committing the direction to memory. "And you? I will find you," he promised, "no matter what happens." From the pass came the sound of approaching horses. Thomas straightened, war paint accentuating his determined expression. "They're coming." Nara stood beside him, her hand finding his. "Then we face them together." Thunder moved to stand at Thomas's other side, forming a united front as the first rider appeared at the valley's entrance. Clark entered the valley first, rifle balanced across his saddle. His men fanned out behind him, wary eyes scanning the seemingly deserted dwelling area. The false silver badge gleamed on his chest, catching the afternoon sun. "Come out, Red Hawk," Clark called, his voice echoing against the valley walls. "We know you're here. This doesn't need to get messy." Silence answered him. Thomas had positioned Nara in a defensive location near the stream, while he circled behind the riders using paths only an Apache would know. Thunder remained hidden in a thicket, awaiting Thomas's signal. Clark dismounted, gesturing for his men to search the wickiups. "The bull is worth more than all of you'll earn in 5 years, he told them. "Find it, and the Apache." "What about the woman?" one man asked. Clark shrugged. "She's nothing." From her hiding place, Nara watched as the men spread out. One approached her position, unaware of her presence behind a screen of juniper. She readied one of her medicine pouches, a mixture that would temporarily blind without causing permanent damage. Across the valley, Thomas moved like a shadow between rocks and trees. His years as a scout returned to him, muscle memory guiding his silent approach toward the nearest of Clark's men. The man never heard Thomas coming. A quick strike rendered him unconscious, allowing Thomas to drag him into the underbrush and bind him with rawhide strips. One down, 4 to go. Near the dwellings, another man kicked through Thomas's family wickiup, sending sacred items scattering across the ground. "Nothing here but Apache trash," he called to Clark. The desecration ignited Thomas's anger, but he controlled it, channeling the emotion into focused action. He circled toward his next target, a bearded man checking the perimeter of the valley floor. From her position, Nara saw one of the men approaching dangerously close. When he turned his back, she emerged silently, tossing her powder mixture into his face. The man cried out, clawing at his eyes, his shout alerting Clark and the others. There! Clark raised his rifle, aiming at Nara as she darted behind a large oak. Before he could fire, a thunderous bellow shook the valley. Thunder charged from his hiding place, massive head lowered, directly toward Clark. The trading post owner barely had time to swing his rifle toward the bull before Thunder was upon him. At the last moment, the bull swerved, his broken horn catching Clark's rifle and tearing it from his hands. The weapon clattered across stones as Clark scrambled backward, fear replacing his usual arrogance. Thomas used the distraction to overtake the third man, who had drawn his pistol. A swift kick sent the weapon flying, followed by a punishing blow that dropped the man to his knees. "What in God's name?" the last man standing gasped, witnessing his companions fall one by one to enemies he could barely see. Nara emerged from cover, another medicine pouch in hand. The man fired wildly in her direction, missing completely before Thomas tackled him from behind. In moments, the odds had shifted dramatically, for men incapacitated with only Clark remaining. Thunder stood between the trading post owner and his fallen rifle, the bull's broken horn now a symbol of defiance rather than damage. Thomas approached Clark, war paint making him seem like an avenging spirit from the valley itself. "It's over, Clark. It's never over," Clark spat, backing away. "That bull is worth a fortune. Do you even know what you have?" "I know exactly what I have," Thomas replied calmly. "The question is whether you know what you've lost." Clark's eyes darted between Thomas, Nara, and Thunder. "You think this changes anything? I own the trading post. I control who eats and who starves for 100 miles. You control nothing here." Thomas gestured to the sacred valley around them. "And there's something you should know about this place." Clark's back hit a rock wall, leaving him nowhere to retreat. "This valley sits on Apache land," Thomas continued. "Land your government promised would remain ours by treaty. Land that contains something you've been searching for." Understanding dawned in Clark's eyes. "Gold," he whispered. "The stream carries gold." Thomas nodded. "My people have known for generations. We left it in the earth where it belongs." "That's why you came back here," Clark said, his voice hardening. "Not for Apache spirits, for Apache gold." "I came home," Thomas corrected. "To heal my spirit, not to take from the earth." The remaining men had begun to stir, watching the confrontation unfold. Thomas raised his voice to address them all. "You followed this man for promises of wealth. But he lied about his authority." Thomas gestured to the false badge. "Just as he lied about his reasons for pursuing us." One of the men looked to Clark with narrowed eyes. "You said this was about stolen property. Your bull." "A bull worth 20 times what I paid you," Clark snapped. "And the gold worth 100 times that," another man accused. Thomas watched as Clark's fragile authority crumbled. The men's loyalty, built on promises of payment rather than respect, dissolved before their eyes. Thunder moved closer to Clark. The broken horn that had once marked him as damaged now pointed at the true broken man among them. The bull's good eye seemed to contain all the judgment Clark deserved. Spring arrived in the Valley of Ancestors, bringing wildflowers that carpeted the meadows in vibrant colors. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with Clark and his men. The traders had departed empty-handed, their fragile alliance shattered by revelations of Clark's true motives. Clark himself had left with threats of return, but Thomas doubted he would risk facing the Apache authorities to whom Thomas had sent word about illegal trespassing on treaty lands. Thomas stood at the valley's edge, surveying the changes they had made. The wickiups had been repaired and expanded. A small garden flourished near the stream, tended by Nara's knowledgeable hands. Thunder grazed contentedly nearby, his massive form sleek with health after a winter of proper care. From the largest wickiup came Nara's voice, singing softly in her native tongue. Thomas approached quietly, ducking through the entrance to find her seated on woven mats, a beautifully crafted cradle board in her hands. She worked carefully, attaching protective amulets to its frame, small medicine bundles and carved symbols from both their tribal traditions. "It's finished," she said, looking up with a smile that transformed her scarred face into something Thomas found more beautiful than any unmarked visage could ever be. Thomas knelt beside her, running his fingers over the cradle board's intricate construction. "Just in time," he said, his eyes moving to Nara's swollen abdomen. Their child would arrive with the full bloom of spring, according to the ancient counting methods both their peoples used. The cradleboard represented everything they had built together, a melding of Apache and Mescalero traditions, practical function with spiritual significance, protection for the future they had once thought impossible. "I received word from the Northern Band," Thomas said. "They will arrive within the moon's cycle." Nara nodded, pleased. During winter, a hunting party had passed through the valley, astonished to find Thomas Red Hawk had returned. Word spread among the scattered Apache families, and several had expressed intention to rejoin him at the ancestral grounds. "Will they accept me?" Nara asked, the question holding less anxiety than it once would have. "They will honor you," Thomas assured her, "as the wife of a medicine man, as a healer in your own right." His hand rested on her belly. "As the mother of new Apache blood." Thunder's deep snort from outside signaled visitors approaching. Welcome ones, judging by the bull's relaxed posture. Thomas stepped out to see 3 Apache riders entering the valley, the advance scouts of the extended family group they expected. The men dismounted, greeting Thomas with traditional respect. Their eyes widened slightly at the sight of Thunder, the bull's reputation having grown in the telling and retelling of Thomas's story throughout Apache lands. "The people come," the lead scout announced. 3 days behind us. Many families." Thomas invited them to share food and rest. As Nara emerged from the wickiup to welcome them, Thomas watched their reactions carefully. The men's eyes noted her scars, then moved respectfully to meet her gaze. They accepted the food she offered with proper thanks, addressing her with the title due a medicine man's wife. Later, as the scouts departed to report back to the main group, Thomas found Nara by the stream, the cradleboard beside her as she gathered fresh water. "They accepted me," she said, wonder in her voice. "They respected you," Thomas corrected. "As they should." Thunder approached from across the meadow, coming to stand near them as he often did during quiet moments. The bull lowered his great head, allowing Nara to stroke the space between his eyes where the broken horn had once marked him as damaged goods. 3 unlikely souls, Thomas mused, cast aside by those who couldn't see their worth. "And now?" Nara asked, though she knew the answer. "Now we are whole," Thomas said simply. "Not despite our broken parts, but because of them." As sunset painted the valley in gold and crimson, Thomas stood with his family, Nara, their unborn child, and Thunder, looking toward the distant pass where their people would soon arrive. The medicine pouch hung proudly around his neck again, his hands once more those of a healer rather than a lost soul. The breeze carried the scent of sage and pine, mingling with the promise of new growth. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, feeling the presence of ancestors all around them, not as ghosts to be feared, but as guides who had led them through darkness into unexpected light. "We are home," he whispered, his words meant for the living and the dead, for all who had been part of their journey. Beside him, Nara placed the cradleboard gently on a flat stone, ready to receive the new life that would carry their shared legacy forward. Thunder stood sentinel nearby, his one good eye somehow seeing more clearly than those with perfect vision ever could. 3 broken beings made whole by finding each other. Their story, like the intricate patterns of the cradleboard, woven from separate threads into something stronger than any could have been alone.